where I did feel something very similar to what a lot of other NDE experiencers report, which is this feeling of just complete love, remembering that we're immortal in some way. And so again, that really changes someone in a very profound way.
Yes, Christine, thank you so much for giving us a chance to speak to you today. So, Christine is a licensed professional counselor that contracted a life-threatening disease in 2008, flesh-eating bacteria. So, that's not fun. And you were given a 1 to 10% chance of surviving. And what's interesting is that months prior, you've had many warning dreams, which are now become the focus of your work. So, why don't we start from these dreams, and then perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your near-death experience.
Sounds wonderful. And Danny, it's wonderful to be here. And you have a wonderful calming voice, by the way. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And I feel honored to be able to share my story and in hopes that it will help other people and also serve to start to destigmatize these
Yes,
experiences,
that's right.
especially in the medical and mental health field.
Correct.
So we'll go back in time to 2008. I was in my 20s, recently graduated from college. And to be honest, I loved school and I was a bit of a type A personality. So I was feeling a bit lost. I was struggling with, feeling depressed, trying to, live up to certain societal ideals of, what success is. And I was really, how should I say, not taking care of myself. And the more I lost touch with kind of my inner soul's drive and honoring my own gifts and uniqueness, I think the more aggressive and loud these certain dreams and kind of warning signs began to be. So about 6 months leading up to my near-death experience and major illness, I experienced what I would call lucid dreams, precognitive dreams, as well as night terrors. And now night terrors, there's often this experience of sleep paralysis, and it can feel incredibly real, incredibly vivid. And for myself, the particular image that kept coming up is I saw this darker, indigenous looking woman um, strangling me, full of rage, anger. And this would happen repeatedly. So I think this happened about 6 or 7 times. And luckily I've documented these dreams in my dream journals, but it was very disturbing. It felt very real. And I would awaken and feel this constriction around my throat. And looking back, again, I think dreams can have many different layers and symbolism. In one way, I think I was suppressing, the anger. I think my soul was not happy in the line of work I was in. I felt like I was sacrificing too much just to, kind of survive in this culture. From another perspective, in this dream, this dream figure also was offering me this red shirt, and that could be representative of all the blood that I lost and all the infusions I received, as well as could also represent my spiritual path, working with Indigenous and Native elders and following the teachings of the Red Road, which has been very, very healing and impactful for me. And in addition to that, I had another dream, which I also documented, where I was seeing inside my subtle body. I was lucid dreaming, and I could see that there was something in my throat that I was trying to remove, like a little mass or a little object. And that actually is where the infection started from. So So I did record these dreams. I did note them. I did feel this sense of something big that was, going to be like showing up in my life. There was just kind of this feeling of unsettledness. And again, I was struggling with depression. Like many young people, I was drinking more, than I should to cope. And that definitely wasn't helping either. So fast forward in time, I was, working in advertising sales. Again, it was not necessarily something I was that passionate about. And I thought I contracted what was the flu. But this felt different, and I knew it was different because by the seventh day, I just was not getting any better. My throat was excruciatingly painful, just a lot of very intense flu-like symptoms. Yet it was the only 2 weeks of my life I did not have health insurance. So I went to the ER, asked for help, and they, like many people without health insurance, and I'm not saying in all hospitals, but this unfortunately seems to be a trend in the United States where I was minimized. I was, just kind of told to go home, take an ibuprofen, and I felt like that was a death sentence. And so I did go home, and I thought, wow, if they can't help me, I at least want to die with my family. So I called my mom and dad, who are living about an hour and a half away. This was in Colorado. My dad comes to pick me up, and they kind of thought, well, you went to the ER, we'll just kind of see how it goes, give you some smoothies and try to nurture you back to health. But within the 2 days in between that time period and the time I made it to the hospital, I was in this altered state, and I was kind of having these life reviews of what I would miss out on, what I would do differently, how much I might miss my family. And again, I knew something was wrong, but it was very hard for me to communicate just how sick I felt. And so there was this point after, again, I was going in and out of consciousness this 2 day period. My dear cat really knew. I think animals are very sensitive, and my cat just laid with me, and that was so comforting and grounding. And I think it helped me survive this period. And so finally, all of a sudden, my heart just starts pounding very, very rapidly. I'm struggling to breathe, and I notice this really thick red rash starting with my neck, and then very quickly, like matter of seconds, minutes, moving down, down, down. And then at that point, the infection had gone into my lungs. I had a lung collapse, and I was actually going into septic shock. And so at this point, my parents rushed me to the hospital, and Memorial Hospital in Colorado Springs. I get tearful every time. They fought to save my life. They admitted me in right away. They thought maybe it was just pneumonia, collapsed lung. They went in to do a tracheotomy, which helps folks breathe. And when they cut in to do that, then they realized, oh my goodness, this is very, very serious. And it's all the, so normally, just a side note, with flesh-eating bacteria or necrotizing fasciitis, it's very quick moving, and sometimes they have to amputate. So in this case, obviously, that I wouldn't survive an amputation because it's in my throat, it's in my chest, down to my abdomen. And so they placed me into a medically induced coma. They did surgery after surgery after surgery. I had a wound back on my chest so that they were trying to clear the infection. And then the hyperbaric oxygen chamber is what also helps save my life. So that flushes the body with, large quantities of pressurized oxygen. And so, I was in this medically induced coma for about 3.5 weeks. And someday it would be neat to write a book from multiple different perspectives, because my dear sister, she documented, she has this journal where she documented my progress throughout the coma, all these different milestones. So there's that perspective of what was going on from my family and friends, and just how frightening that was, what a roller coaster. There's the medical perspective. And when I look at my medical files, it's just amazing what I survived. And I'm so grateful for the care I received. And there's that physical perspective, but then there's also the spiritual and the consciousness perspective. And my experience, I guess you could call it maybe a darker NDE, but it wasn't just, dark or all light. But, there's new research coming out, and I'm going to quote a dear friend and colleague I'm working with, Alan Pierce, Coma and Near-Death Experiences. I really appreciate his work because he's showing the impact of these coma experiences, and that even though people are considered to be asleep and not awake, when one is in a coma experience, there is an increased sensitivity, I believe. And he researches and details some incredible case studies, just showing how coma survivors can sense what's happening around them, the procedures that are happening, the loved ones. There's just an unbelievable area of research that I think needs to be explored with these experiences. But coming back to my own experience, I really divided up into 3 stages. And so the first stage for me, I kind of use the analogy of, the shamanic initiation of dismemberment and, torture, because that's what it was. My body was being opened and closed again. And I felt it. I felt it physically, emotionally, spiritually. So I went through that experience of feeling a lot of pain, feeling like my body was being tested on, and like I was not in control. And it was very, very confusing and frightening. But then there was this shift. And I don't know if it's related to the hyperbaric oxygen chambers. I suspect there may be one aspect that is, but I went into this realm that felt like an underground cave, and it felt like an eternity. It literally felt like I was there forever. It felt, and this is what coma survivors say, it felt more real than right now you and I talking. And I can remember and recall the images and the feelings. And so I was floating on this beautiful, clear blue water. There's this music playing in the background. There's these red Chinese lanterns floating all around me. And there's this sense that reality is just ever so off, and that I'm waiting for something. So it's like this realm where I'm resting. And it does remind me, in Tibetan Buddhism, they talk about the different bardos. And it does remind me of some of the descriptions of the Tibetan bardos, where my body, my soul was resting. And then I went into, and this is the part I'm still trying to make sense of, what I might call another life or another reality, where I was an Asian woman. I was much older. Well, I had all my memories. I lived through, her childhood. And at this point in time, I was in my 40s, maybe 50s. I was living in the middle of the ocean on this large wooden boat. And I was part of the human trafficking trade. I myself was a human trafficking survivor and victim, and I was bringing other women onto this ship. And it's really hard to talk about because I experience the memories and the emotions so deeply. But I do remember just this feeling of complete hopelessness, disempowerment. And the women, we weren't allowed to really look at each other, talk to one another. And it just felt like there was no way out of this situation. And so, I can remember again, as I talk about this, the creaking of the boards, just the whole atmosphere of the ship and feeling trapped in the middle of the ocean. But at this really critical moment, this woman appeared, who's my sister in my current life, but she was in different form. But I recognized her eyes, and her eyes looked deeply into mine, and there was just this feeling of shared pain and compassion and understanding that just like broke the spell. And in that instant, it was as though I knew another person truly understood my pain. And it gave us hope to start like trying to plan a way to liberate ourselves. So we ended up using opium and covertly trading opium to liberate women and save their lives. And, in this dream experience, it was just so unbelievable to me that, this substance is worth more than a human being's life. So I carry those lessons with me from that experience. And in Ellen Pierce's book, many people might dismiss that as, oh, it's just a dream, or it's delirium, or it's, psychosis kind of induced from this experience. But, I do believe that was a turning moment in my experience. And when I read through what my sister wrote and her documentation of what happened, she speaks of several moments where I pulled myself out of the coma. I awoke and we locked eyes, and so that experience did happen. And I think that again influenced my coma experience and possibly my decision. I do believe on a soul level, we may have some decision whether we stay or leave. My decision to be here. And a lot of my work involves, empowerment of women, but not just, women, because these value systems affect both women and men negatively. And I believe, very much that our system is out of balance in terms of respecting the masculine and feminine aspects in all of us. So that was a turning point. And I also remember other pieces where I did feel something very similar to what a lot of other NDE experiencers report, which is this feeling of just complete love, becoming one with something much larger than oneself, remembering that we're immortal in some way. And so again, that really changes someone in a very profound way. And so when I finally began to come out of that coma, it was very hard. I was intubated for a long time, and that was just a journey in and of itself, trying to get off the ventilator, learning to breathe for myself. My voice was just a whisper. I still have a vocal cord that's damaged, but it was a tremendous experience that somehow energized my will to live. So before this experience, I was really suffering from depression, definitely some passive suicidal thoughts. But after this experience, it was like, and this is going to sound weird, but every breath was just so unbelievably important. And this is one thing I love about Indigenous tradition and culture is they have this wider perspective and this sense of relationship, to the earth, to each other, to creator. that I think really is grounding. And they talk about, just air, breathing, how critical that is. Water, a lot of vision quest ceremonies have us abstain from food and water. And we take so much for granted.
That's so
And
true. Yeah.
and also just the strangers that showed up to help not only nurture my physical body, but just emotionally. In that hospital, every act of kindness meant more than I could ever express. And I had this incredible inner strength now, in this sense of knowing myself on a much deeper level. And even though I had, definitely bad days, some painful days, I had some doubts about, they took some muscle out. So I thought maybe I won't be able to, hold my head up or walk again, eat again, breathe again. Would I be disabled? I was worried about being a burden on my family. But I learned this incredible practice of putting in the effort, trying to heal, and then just letting go of those expectations, just trying the best moment to moment. And each ability that I got back, I mean, it was like, in a way, being reborn, and you go through all these phases, like you're a toddler, you can barely walk. Then, I felt at one point like I was going through adolescence again. But each ability that I gained back was just this incredible celebration. Like, oh my gosh, I can eat food. It took me like 4 months to be able to, eat food.
Wow.
Going outside in nature, and just, I mean, it was like everything was so much more just, I don't know how to describe, like the colors, the feelings, everything was just so much more vivid and pronounced for me. And so I do believe now, that I've worked with a lot of trauma survivors, and I've had the honor of studying in different traditions. And I definitely respect the Red Road and Native wisdom, and what, Indigenous people have endured, the, genocide and continued oppression. But they are a culture that I believe has reached some level of spiritual maturity, enduring these kinds of atrocities, and still thriving and being here and having their culture. And so for myself, being brought to the edge of death and then coming back, I didn't technically die, although, I was definitely somewhere else, and it could be a past life, other life, it could be another aspect of myself, it could be another consciousness that I connected with deeply. I don't know. I don't claim to, have that knowledge, but I'm very curious about the possible explanations. And when something like that happens as well, it seems to unlock this boundary between self and other. So after that experience, this is the hard part, but also, it's also a gift. I can call it that, I think now, is that increased sensitivity. And trauma survivors especially do have that, I think. So in our Western culture, we typically value, I mean, I'm going to make some generalizations, but, strength and kind of hardness, and there's certain, hierarchical values, and we are taught to suppress our feelings, and we are taught and conditioned to think of sensitivity as a negative thing. But it can be life-saving, and I can also talk about several examples where precognitive dreams or intuition or sensitivity saved my life or others' lives, or, helped have a more positive outcome. And so I could feel other people's feelings more readily, which was very overwhelming and confusing to me.
Yeah,
I was having very lucid dreams every night, precognitive dreams
wow.
constantly, which I still have and record and honor. And it was hard to cope with this. And especially this sense of time was difficult for me to come back and really, work within these systems that have these kind of rigid notions of time. Because for myself, time, is not linear. And especially when someone has a precognitive experience, you kind of question free will. How much are we able to change our future? How much of this story has already been written? How much are we participating? And I still haven't completely made up my mind. I will plug in right here Eric Wargo's research and books, Time Loops and Precognitive Dreaming in the Long Self. He's also been really, really important in my research and understanding of these phenomena. And then in addition, to these experiences, it's hard to go back to living the way you did before. It kind of feels like this life is a miracle and there's all these amazing things happening. And at times that can be, ungrounding or very difficult. But there is a certain magic to life and less fear of death as well. That's something a lot of NDEs report that, I think I love working with people on these issues as well, like chronic pain, death and dying, altered states of consciousness. If we could lean into these phenomena and experiences more and not be so afraid of talking about them, I think there's so much to be gained. And again, I think that's something a lot of older traditions have that we are kind of missing in modern society. We idealize, youth, and we want the physical body to look a certain way. But aging is very beautiful and natural, and death is a normal part of the cycle of life and this process. And it can be a birth into another life or into another realm. And that's what I believe personally. So, so that's been another way in which my life has been transformed. And, I also try to reflect on my life every day that this is a new day. I try not to take it for granted, just being here. And I think we have so much power. We have so much ability to change the world, to impact those around us, but we're constantly conditioned and reinforced through, media and culture that we should feel insecure and afraid. And, scapegoating is another big issue in our culture. And I'm a Jungian psychotherapist, so I really believe in, leaning into the shadow, leaning into the emotions that we repress, what we're most afraid of, because when we really stare down our fears and lean in, often they just dissipate or shift, or we uncover this whole dimension. It's so easy to just and I love doing the work I do, because it's like you realize each person has this whole universe inside of them, and it's so easy to just look at someone and stereotype or judge. But when you sit down and listen, it's unbelievable the lives that people live and the beauty and the resiliency from just all walks of life. And so I also think that's something, our culture needs more of, is just listening to one another. It's so easy to put a label on someone, but profound growth when we, cease to judge someone by a small, tip of the iceberg action. Say someone does something violent. What are all the moments in that person's life, all their experiences, their ancestors' experiences that led to this particular moment in time? I mean, we all, yeah. And anyhow, it's been a really wonderful experience. And for me, I'm still integrating that near-death experience. Even though this happened in 2008, I'm still receiving, further awarenesses, lessons, and gifts about, just this whole experience.
Well,
I'll
thank you for
pause because
sharing.
I know I've rambled.
No, that's great. Thank
Yeah,
you for sharing, Christine. You touched on a lot of very interesting points. And well, I do have a few questions, if I may. So first of all,
definitely.
I'd love to talk about time because obviously most, if not all, near-death experiences, they do talk about experiencing the fact that now we feel the time is linear, but this concept kind of fades away, when you're in the other dimension. So would you mind elaborating a little bit on that?
I love this topic of time. And I think, there are different types of time. So in the West, we have this linear concept of time, but many other cultures did have a more circular representation of time, and especially noting that there's certain historical events that repeat as well. And so that has been a really interesting point of research for myself, and I'm still trying to navigate that. I still struggle with getting time right and making all my appointments because, in our culture, I'm making generalizations. We tend to really focus on the future, with kind of the detriment to the present. We're always working, I'll be happy when I have this,
Yeah.
or when I have this, I can finally let go and relax. And so I think healing can really occur in this timeless state where there's a sense of not only kind of presence, but also there might be this sense of, I think vertical time might be kind of one way to describe it, where, if it's so hard to really kind of describe some of these insights or feelings, but I think not all moments of time have quite the same quality, and there may be certain moments that seem to last forever, especially if someone's in a lot of pain or resisting something. They may feel like, oh my gosh, I just want this to be over. And that quality of time feels different. Whereas if we're in the state of flow and we're really engaged in the moment or creative work, there's something magical kind of happens with time. And I do think, perhaps time is malleable in some way. I also think it's possible to time travel through our own consciousness. And, in healing work, especially, I think there's a lot of even therapists who do inner child work where we imagine or experience going back in time to younger parts of ourselves to, you know, uh, to heal or to witness compassionately things that traumatic that may have happened, and events in the future. I think there's enough evidence at this point. BEM has done a lot of research, just noting how the body reacts physiologically to events that happen beforehand. And there's tons of case studies talking about, precognitive experiences and collective experiences that anticipate something that will happen in the future. And if you imagine someone throwing like a rock into a pool of water, the larger the event, the larger the rock, you could say maybe the more distressing or life-threatening the event, the more that event is going to ripple into the past. But then again, this does bring up questions of, free will. How much can we impact our future? I have a lot of questions about that. And, if I'll share one other story to kind of illustrate my point, and I think this is related to time and space. When I was graduating from my master's degree program, I had a friend who ended up passing away from cancer. And I really wanted to be there physically because I cared about this friend deeply. But I couldn't at the time. And I ended up having this incredible dream where I went to her in the hospital. We went to, our favorite places in my dream, along the beach. We got to say goodbye. And then she left. I said, you don't have to go back to this hospital bed. And I called my friend when I woke up from this dream, who was sitting with this dear friend who had cancer. And she said, she just took her last breath. She just passed away. So for myself, that did feel like a real experience. It's hard to prove, but if there is that strength of, I think love connects people, familial attachments, land as well. I think that transcends time and space, that we have that potential. And so even though, I couldn't be there physically, there was definitely a part of myself that got to say goodbye, got to have closure, and that's meaningful. And so again, I think, I don't think I'm the only one that's capable of this. I hear stories like this all the time.
Oh, yes.
And especially around accidents or death and dying, people experience a lot of sympathetic, pains. So I think, the other point I want to make is, I think, in a lot of Indigenous cultures that I've studied or kind of worked with, they put less emphasis on rigid time constraints and more emphasis on the right action, appropriate timing, really being present. They, elders are allowed to really speak a long time, take up space, so there's less focus on meeting these kind of rigid arbitrary time constraints, in my opinion. And there's more attunement to the natural world, which I think is a more accurate, or not more accurate, more meaningful way to relate to time. And then also the way they look at, they orient their culture. So they honor the ancestors. They look back hundreds, thousands of years into the past. They have this oral history. They have, these teachings they've preserved. And then they try to make decisions based upon, multiple generations of descendants. So they have a way of relating with time that includes greater sense of responsibility, in my opinion, to other time periods. Whereas in the West, it's kind of like we're concerned with short-term immediate benefit and profit, often at the expense of
the future,
our descendants.
Yeah, that's right. Wow. Well, I'd love to talk about your integration, because I know most people assume that, people that come out with a near-death experience, or perhaps in your case, a near-death-like experience that perhaps didn't require an event of clinical death, and they come out instantly transformed. But you mentioned earlier that you're still making sense of some of these concepts, and people, don't understand that integration is something that keeps going; it never really stops. So I'd love to know a little bit more about integration process, if I may.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking this question. Actually, I really think it's very, very important. And I just want to share the shadow side of near-death experiences, or spiritually transformative experiences.
Yes, please.
And we're dealing with something extremely powerful. And when that happens, I think, and I definitely experienced this myself, you have these magical things happen, or you feel this sense of inner divine, or, godlike qualities. And it's easy to have that God or Messiah complex, to think, oh, wow, I'm doing this, or I'm special. And yes, we're all, I'm special, but so are you. And and we're all special, and we need to respect that. And so what I've seen a lot in working with different, spiritual, religious communities, is that there can be an inflation that happens if one is not grounded. And it can also lead to, I think, people doing harm. I think that definitely can happen as well. So I think when someone goes through something so intense like a near-death experience, there is an element of spiritual surrender, which is very powerful. And people can experience this, in different formats. So in church, different ceremonies. And the issue with that is, I think after an experience like that, people can become very susceptible to authoritarian control. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to plug in Stephen Hassan's work. He's created something called a BITE model: behavior, information, thought, and emotion control. And then he also has an online test that will help individuals evaluate any kind of group that they want to belong to or be a part of. Because once someone goes through that experience, and especially there's certain individuals who I do think can kind of channel this intense energy or power, but then, there's the dynamics of authority, power and control, and obedience. And in my opinion or perspective, I think, my own true spiritual search has been about empowerment and, thinking critically, finding information that fits or resonates or helps, and then discarding other information. But, there are many groups that can become, how should I say, intoxicated with power and end up, I think, disempowering some of the other group members. And so I think, these experiences are real, but we have to be very, very careful about the power dynamics. And right now I'm working on a research team, working with the power of ketamine-assisted therapy, psilocybin therapy as well, in FDA drug-approved form. Mm-hmm. And this is very much a part of training, is being aware of how powerful one's words are, a look, actions are, when someone is in, that very vulnerable, altered state of consciousness. And it's not our job to, make meaning for someone else or tell them what their experience is or isn't. That experience is unique to each person. It's a gift. And I think it's very important that the individual has the space to really explore, their story and what it means to them. Because it's very tempting, again, for others to place their own meaning on someone else's experience. So there is a shadow side to this spiritual experience, and it can be really ungrounding. It can cause us to, make boundary violations. And, again, it can lead to kind of the God or Messiah complex. And it's hard to integrate. It really can be. For myself, having increased sensitivity was very, very difficult to manage. And I would go through this process of just shutting it down, ignoring it, being afraid of it, and trying to open up in a healthy and safe way. And so I think that might be different for each person. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate your honesty about this topic, because I don't think we talk about the darker side of near-death experiences or any STE, spiritually transformative experiences, enough. But they're certainly real, and as you mentioned, people often don't even have the right support network to be able to talk about these things freely, and they don't know how to navigate perhaps these experiences so easily. And obviously associations like IANDS, we're here to hopefully improve that a little bit.
Yes, yes. And I also want to honor the, historical and cultural impact of just the mental health field, and how there's been kind of this gap between, science and spirituality, or mental health and spirituality. And there's a fine line between, labeling someone as schizophrenic or that being a psychotic episode compared to, a near-death experience or Kundalini awakening. And language and culture is really important. There's another great book I'm going to plug in, Thomas Say's Manufacture of Madness. And I think he does a really good job of looking at the historical underpinnings of some of the language, labels, and abuses that took place in the mental health field. And so, there's definitely colonialism and sexism that influences some of these norms. We're reaching a time in history where it right now, for the moment, appears safer to talk about these things, and there's more legitimacy, especially with IANDS. They've done an amazing job, really creating a platform and a place for people to come together to talk about these experiences in a very serious way. And I think we need more of that, and to acknowledge some of the historical abuses, because that's still present in many of our systems. And I think we need to find a better way of bridging that gap.
Thank you, Christine. What would you say is the biggest lesson that you've learned from your experience?
Just, I think, humility, connection, that there's a lot of people that are hurting out there, and it doesn't do any good to just hide and pretend and cover up, the hurt and the pain that it, this is something collectively that we can address and that we can work on and heal from. But, so much of the time we're all in our own little bubble, trying to work on our lives, or, accumulating more, or say, just working on ourselves. But there's just this incredible interrelatedness. And I think that has really changed my perspective as well. I'm a Jungian, so I really pay attention to synchronicity. And I think that's a more meaningful way to engage in time. And that if we can also look at this world as kind of a collective dream that we've all created, and that we do have the power to change it. So I am hopeful, even though there's so many painful, difficult, scary things happening, kind of seemingly all at once. But it's also a great challenge and opportunity. And I do wonder, if maybe we're all here right now at this moment in time for some reason. So we can't do it alone, though. I really think, I really think this is an opportunity for people to recognize how powerful and big a lot of these changes are, and that we're all related, no matter how insignificant, a thought, word, action, that I do think there's ripple effects, and it's not to say we have to be perfect all the time or happy or calm,
Of course,
but,
yes.
That's one thing that has helped me in kind of working with my gifts and sensitivity, is a lot of times I'll check in and, I may feel a certain way a certain day, and then I realize, oh, this isn't just me. There may be other things happening in the world, or other things happening to loved ones. So one of my spiritual teachers, Wolf and Lisa, would say, there's an invisible string connecting your heart to anyone you've ever loved, alive, dead, past, present. And I do think that there is kind of this invisible web. It's like the native myth about, the spider web and being that connects all of us. And maybe the internet was kind of a tool to help us begin to relate in that different way. But I also think we have that structure built within ourselves, and that we have the power to connect more deeply. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. Based on your experience, what do you think is the reason for us to be here on Earth?
Oh my goodness. I don't know if I can answer that. That's a great question, though. Sometimes I do think about it being kind of like a school in a way, or this learning experience. And, the question, I was a philosophy and psychology major in my undergrad, and I love the field of philosophy. And in ethics and morality, it's often talked about like the problem of evil. If God or creator exists, why would this be allowed to happen? And I do wonder that maybe it isn't supposed to be all easy. And maybe we do have certain blinders on, in terms of maybe not remembering other lives or other experiences, or, being in these physical bodies and experiencing life in this way, that maybe, yeah, maybe there's a reason for that. And maybe there is a larger perspective. I definitely feel that I experienced it with my own near-death experience. And, when a lot of people hear my story, they might think, oh my gosh, that's so terrible that happened to her, like, all that pain and suffering. I just don't, I look at it as the most incredible gift. And I know that may sound strange, but, I think there's a certain point, even within suffering, that if you can let go or surrender to it, it opens our hearts more. It connects us more with other people. And there are some pretty terrible things, that are happening right now that do break my heart. But again, I just think if we open up to that, and we really learn to deal with our pain in a more constructive, healthier, supportive way, that we can change these things. So I don't look back and regret that experience at all, or think poor me that I went through that. It helped orient me on a totally new path. And I would not be who I am today without it. So, I do have hope, and I do see people who've gone through unbelievable situations in their life and their childhoods. But I tell you, it's such an honor to be a counselor and listen, because there's just incredible resiliency. People are amazing. Anyhow, I'll just leave it at that.
I don't think that there's not much needs to be added, to be honest.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know, what's your idea of God these days?
Oh, it's so interesting that we always are thinking that God is outside of us, or God is this all-knowing, omnipotent being. For myself, I'm going to get a little tearful. I really think back to my childhood and living on this beautiful farm, and the connection with nature, all the different animals and bugs, and the sun and the wind. I think God really can be in everything that is, everything that exists here. And coming back to the Indigenous way of thinking, there is this idea of, Ohama Takuyasen, we are all created, or we are all related, and we're all a part of creation. And there's this reciprocity in life, and this active participation. And we are not just like passive witnesses. This comes back to quantum theory. Science is starting to validate this. The witnessing actually is doing something, it's changing something. And so I think, it's in all of us, and how different people might, how different we might move through our day, or, be in the world, especially, you know, I live in Tucson and there's just this homelessness epidemic. And it's just unbelievable to me how we treat not only the natural world and animals and human beings, but also, you know, objects. We're a culture that throws objects away. I think there can be a sacredness and a divinity to everything. And so, yeah, I really like that question of just what is God? And I can't like answer it. I don't, you know logically, but I just have this inner sense of when we can awaken to that this whole thing is a part of creation and God, you know, that again, that brings things back into focus and a different kind of magic into life. Yeah.
Love that. Christine, I have one last question for you that I usually like to conclude these conversations with. What's the meaning of life for you?
Okay, well, Nietzsche was another big influence of mine, and I really love his writings and books. And he talks about, you know, kind of from a philosophical standpoint, these different stages of history. And a lot of people call Nietzsche a nihilist. That is the opposite of what Nietzsche is. He is not a nihilist. He doesn't believe that there's no meaning in anything. In fact, it's the complete opposite. His ethics and morality was a kind of post-morality, because what he was saying is that the old way of worshiping in church with God is something that doesn't seem to have as much weight on our daily lives as it did in the past. In the past, you know, the church was the authority of everything. But now, you know, we've moved into more of kind of an economic, commercialized, and scientific way of viewing the world. And in some ways, that, you know, there's a lot of benefits to science, but in some ways, you know, like I said, if you read the scientific description of what happened to my body during my near-death experience, that's very different from my sister's perspective or my perspective. And yes, that kind of language is important, but it can also strip it's the meaning from things. And Nietzsche's observation was that even science carries a kind of bias in it. It's this bias of objectivity and this claim to truth, absolute truth. And so his philosophy, which I, you know, tend to agree with to some extent, is this idea of meaning making, that we are meaning making creatures. And again, that's why I come back to Jungian psychology and synchronicity, and especially right now with where we're at in our technological development, I think there may be kind of a shift in this other direction, just recognizing the importance of creating new meaning and values. And I see it in the healing work that I do. Someone can go through an unbelievably traumatic event and be stuck in that event and held back in that event. But if you can make meaning from that experience and explore your own personal subjective narrative, there's healing and empowerment in that. And then last plug for the book, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Incredible book, concentration camp survivor.
Yep.
And, you know, just, yeah, the unbelievable resiliency and lessons from that. It's, you know, I think it's a part of being human.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question. But
Yeah, that's why there's no right
yeah.
or wrong answer, to be honest.
Yeah.
So that is the beauty of it, right? So, Christine, thank you so much. I had a lovely conversation. I thank you for all the work that you're doing, you know, to bring some light to this
Thank you.
humanity. And yeah, wishing you all the best.
Thank you. It's so good to meet you, Danny.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Take care. Oh, hi there. Well, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to support the IANDS community, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and maybe share with the ones you love. If you're looking for another video to watch, I think this could be a very good one. New episodes out every Friday. And until then, enjoy the stream we all call live and live the love you wish to see in the world. Bye for now.